Hi, welcome back to Future Fast, and I hope you're enjoying what you've been following on Future Fast so far. And particularly for those of you who are here for the first time, you obviously have missed the first part of our conversation with Dr. Bruno Soares Gonçalves. And I really urge you to look up the first part of our conversation so that you'll be able to connect with this conversation that we're going to have now. And for the rest of you, I'm sure you're enjoying it. And if you're not yet subscribed to Future Fast, do it now. And Bruno, once again, welcome to Future Fast, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Bruno, I'll jump straight into the conversation of why nuclear energy.
Yeah, so it was when I returned to Portugal, coming from a jet from Culham in Oxford. One of the activities that we had in our lab and the need was outreach, going to schools, speaking with kids about what we were doing. And this is related to a drive that we had in Portugal to communicate science to young generations, to bring them to science and engineering, because there was a moment where science and engineering was not something that kids would consider as a career. And this was growing. So we had, again, I mentioned Professor Mariano Gago, which was Minister of Science in Portugal. He promoted the creation of what they call Ciência Viva, living science labs around the country. And this outreach became very important. So I start going to schools speaking about what we were doing, nuclear fusion. And nuclear fusion, when you start speaking nuclear fusion, we are always the other nuclear, nuclear. And it's difficult to explain why we are different. And so you need to start speaking about the differences between nuclear. And to start discussing the differences between nuclear, you start digging on what really they are different and why is there that you have all these concerns about nuclear. So this grew over time. So this was in 2007, and until today, I continue going to schools. We give training to teachers from secondary schools, and they invite us to go there and speak about nuclear fusion. But of course, I became more and more involved on this discussion on energy and the need for energy and why we need energy and what is the role that nuclear fission will have on this energy. Because there's this idea nuclear fission is the future, and we don't need fission. Nuclear fusion is the future, but we don't need nuclear fission now because it's just around the corner. And actually, it is tomorrow, well, probably not tomorrow, probably the day after tomorrow, but it's not immediately that we are going to have nuclear fusion. So it is important to clarify in the minds of people the differences and why nuclear fission may have a role. So it became natural from the discussion. And now a lot of my contribution is trying to explain why nuclear makes sense and why sometimes nuclear, which is considered a bad energy and with nasty effects, probably is not the correct view to have, and that we may need nuclear fission for the near future. So it became natural.
Well, in through your journey, what are the most difficult decisions that you had to make? And how do you approach decision making per se, both from a researcher point of view, and does it change when you look at your role as a president of an organization or institution?
Yeah, well, I would say that it is the most. I wouldn't say it is difficult, but it was a moment that I had to take a decision that impacted both on my professional life and on my personal life. When I returned from the UK and I returned to Portugal, there was still the opportunity to going abroad again, and I was enjoying working abroad. Of course, when I returned to Portugal again, I realized what I was missing from Portugal, where I love to live. And the decision at that moment was because my eldest son was 6 years old, so he was starting primary. So the difficult decision there was to balance, should I go abroad and if I go, I have to stay there because he's just starting his school life, and it doesn't make sense to be always changing and returning, etc. So I would say that this was one of the most difficult decisions because it had an impact both on my professional life and on my personal life. I do not regret staying in Portugal. It was probably the best decision, but that was the moment where a decision had to be taken that impacts both directions. After becoming a president, most of the difficult decisions are related with people, and you have to interact with people, and most of the decisions are related people and budget and people, and budget to have people or budget to not have people. And decisions sometimes involve not renewing contracts. Those are difficult for me. I don't like to be a nasty person, and having to communicate to someone that, well, I'm sorry, this is not working, is not something that I do really appreciate. It has to be done. One thing that I realize, you do not make friends becoming head of a research unit. You make new friends, but sometimes you lose some from the past. You don't make the best friends among colleagues, for certainly. And but that's life. I came to terms with that. But I would say that the most difficult decisions usually involve people, and also in personal life, you usually involve people. What you do affects the other people in your life, your family, and these are probably the ones that I would say are the most challenging ones.
How do you handle when a decision goes wrong?
You cope with it. You have to assume your responsibility. Things go wrong, and you don't always take the right decisions. The best you can do is mitigate the effects if you took a wrong decision, and you need to find what is the way that you can, if not mitigate, at least to steer in the direction that helps you to correct something that was a wrong decision. But the process is you accept it, and you try to find the ways to go around and to mitigate it and to do the best. Sometimes it's unavoidable. You cannot go back. You already took the decision. The best you can do is to ensure that you take the best decisions before taking them, that you consider all that is involved and how it affects. But sometimes if you take decisions have to be taken. What I realize over time is the worst decision that you can take is the one that you do not take, basically. If you do not take decisions and you let things marinating over time, and
it's like wait it over, let the things change by itself.
Things you cannot expect things to happen just because you don't take a decisions, and then you say, well, it's taken, but it was not taken by you. So these I really do not appreciate. So you should consider what is the best approach, and you do it, and then you live with your decisions. Not taking a decision someone will take for you, and that I think is I consider to be the worst thing, really, and it's much more noxious to everyone around you. You are not assuming your role.
True. But see, most times even the mirror only shows what you want to see, right? I mean, we only see what we want to see. So it so often happens that we tend to get into a loop in most of the way we act, and many a times we think we are behaving differently, but invariably it's the same thing, right? It's that loop we are in. So have you found yourself in such a loop, and how do you work towards breaking out of that loop?
Yeah, I try to avoid that, to become a resonance box of myself, and so usually I tell people that are around me to let me know if things are not going well, to help me or to show me if I'm not taking a decision. I don't take that wrong if they tell me, well, that was not correct or you are not correct, so we need to discuss. We take in IPFN, we have different research groups, and we have a governing board that has meetings regularly that also help to take decisions and to discuss all the important topics. And in my personal life, I hope that my wife is the person that helps me understanding if I'm incorrect. That she also tells me if I'm wrong, and that I'm not just full of myself, and that I consider all the decisions. So the best way to avoid this resonance box is to have around you people that are critics, and that are really critics and not just saying you are correct. So that they are willing to criticize you and to help you to take the best decisions. So I'm sure I am not always correct, and that people around me will tell me that. So you don't want people always saying you are correct, you are correct, you are correct. If you have that, probably something is wrong around you.
Totally. Right. So, what in your institute, is this the government-aided institute? Is it owned by the government, or is that a private institution supported by government? What kind of organization is that?
Yeah, so we have different models in Portugal. We are a research institute integrated into a university. So the manager of the research institute is the university itself. From the point of view of funding, we have national funding for research, and then we have competitive calls. Actually, 63 to 66% of our funding comes from international calls where we participate, mostly on the European Commission, but from different programs, research programs that we participate, and then there's about 33 to 36% that comes to 37% that comes from national funding, which is also competitive. We still have to apply, etc. So we are also what is called an associated laboratory in Portugal, which means that we have a statute where we do work on areas that are of interest for the government. And we have an additional funding for that, which comes also from a competitive call. But overall, we are integrated into the university with all that has good from being integrated in the university, and all the bad things also. But okay.
So by virtue of that, you attract a lot of talent from across Europe coming into your institute.
We would love to attract more. Portugal is not attractive from the point of view of employment. It's not. It was probably before it was a bit more because salaries were not high, but at least living in Portugal was not expensive. The problem now that we face is that living in Lisbon is quite expensive, even for students, and it's becoming more and more difficult to retain people here in Lisbon, and to attract people that are willing to stay here, because even if they are willing to stay, it may become difficult to pay for housing. And we are having that problem. Recently we had a great PhD student that was going to become our postdoc, but he had a better offer in Germany, and he went away. And we are having more and more of these problems. Sometimes we attract people from Europe, not a huge amount. We attract people also not from Europe. Actually, we had students from Indonesia. We had students from India, Pakistan, with us, not a huge amount, but we are attracting people. But it's becoming more and more difficult due to salary and cost of living here. But of course, being in university, we still have access to some students, some pool of students that come to us, very clever students. But what I realize now is that most of the people don't see research as probably the best decision in their lives, and they are willing to go to companies and try, even if they do research in companies, but they are willing to go and find what is going on outside the academia. Which is also quite good. The problem is that they are not returning after. But we are fulfilling our role to train people, and to train people that become professionals, even if they don't stay with us. So it's okay.
Sure. So how do you address the question of sustainability in relation to nuclear energy? I know there are a lot of people actually make an argument that nuclear is more sustainable, but what's your argument on?
Yeah. So first of all, the first thing I usually say about energy, and we should never forget, is nuclear is a weapon of mass decarbonization. What does that mean? So nuclear produces 5 to 6 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produced. And it is by far the energy that produces the least CO2 if you take into account the whole life cycle of the power plant. So it's not me that says that. This is in a report from UNES, from the United Nations. So it is the least producing CO2 energy. So it is really a weapon of mass decarbonization. So this is the first thing. So having realized that, there's another important aspect. Of course, the comparison and the big discussion is always renewables against nuclear. The question here is that renewables are important and they are progressing. They are fast to implement. But renewables are intermittent. So they are variable. They depend on the sun that you have in the sky, if you don't have clouds or if it is windy. And you still need to have this stable production of energy that today in most of the countries is produced by gas or by burning coal. And nuclear is really the option for doing that without producing greenhouse gases. So nuclear makes sense. And if you start looking into different countries that did very detailed studies about what is the proper mix, you realize that nuclear, the mix of nuclear and renewables in the proper proportion will be cheaper, will provide you cheaper electricity. And the reason why this is the case is because when you start having a lot of penetration from renewables, you need to have backup energy installed. You need to have more investment in grids, and you need to have energy storage to ensure that you have this firming energy. And that's why having total system costs analysis brings you to the conclusion that you really need to have a proper mix. And actually, it's not from now that this starts to appear. In 2019, there is a study from OCDE where they arrived to the conclusion that higher penetration of renewables is expensive and it has costs. So we need really to have a mix where nuclear and renewables work together. It's difficult to accept to some countries. We have countries in Europe that do not agree with that. We have Germany, we have Portugal, we have Spain. They think that the way to go is renewables alone, but actually it will become very difficult. Even last week, the president of the Association for Renewables in Spain said that closing the nuclear power plants in Spain probably is not a good option because they need them to provide electricity. Of course, the discussion on nuclear always comes to it's expensive. Of course, it is capital intensive to produce nuclear. You need money upfront to build the power plant.
The very cost of power plant itself is significantly high, right? Compared to a plant to manufacture PV chips. I mean, it's a significant differences there in the very cost. So which is almost 10, 12 times compared to a PVC and marginally high. That's only the plant cost I'm talking.
Yeah, but you have to take into account first you are building a power plant that can live up to 80 years. While when you build a plant with the solar PV or with the photovoltaic or with wind, we are speaking about 20 years. So you have to redo it again, repower again after 20 years. That is also a cost. Even
the per kilowatt cost, if you look at it, right, per kilowatt hour cost, it's significant, right?
It depends. Well, first, it depends on the countries that you are looking. Of course, people like to speak about the most expensive reactors. So you have the European pressurized reactors on Kyoto 3, you have Vogtle in the United States, and you have Hinkley Point C. But actually, you have very good examples of power plants being built for a very low cost. You have Barak power plants in the Emirates, which are from South Korean design, that they were not that expensive, and they were built on time. You also have the Hualong reactors from the Chinese, also not expensive, then they are progressing. And of course, now we do not speak, and it's not an option for Europe, but you have the Russian technology that is being also provided for a cheap cost. So the question is that nuclear and the new nuclear has been expensive from the European design that were taken on board. But nuclear all over the world actually is not expensive and is not taking a lot of time. So the average around the world is about 7 years to bring a power plant from starting the construction to operation. So this is the average, the world average at the moment, 7.1 years. Of course, it doesn't compare with the Okyoto, which was 199 months of something of that sort, but there were problems, litigation problems. So if you don't cherry pick the power plants that you are speaking about, you find solutions that are not that expensive, and do not take a lot of time to build. And also, you need to compare, when you compare the cost of renewables, you need to compare what Lazard now uses, which is the firming cost of renewables. And when you put storage into the cost, right, then the prices are quite comparable, because you need to firm the electricity that is being provided. And it's not comparable to, you cannot compare something that has about 20% capacity factor, like PV, or 27% capacity factor like wind, with a power plant that has a 90% capacity factor. It's there when you need, or it can be there most of the time when you need it. You can rely on it to provide you electricity. And one fact is that electricity consumption is not going to decrease. This is another important aspect. We are acting as if the consumption of electricity will only slightly grow. But we are forgetting that 1/8 of the world population still doesn't have access to electricity. They will have to have electricity. And if these populations start consuming electricity, if you take on board all the electrification of the society, you will need to provide more energy. And more energy cannot only be renewables. You need stable. And of course, you have the example of China, where the growth of energy is the energy production in China has grown a lot with the use of renewables, but also of coal and nuclear. So they need everything to produce energy. So nuclear has a role for decarbonization. And also the United Nations agree with that. And the International Energy Agency agrees with that. It says we cannot decarbonize without nuclear having a role. So it's quite important. And
yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Please.
No. Please go ask the question. Probably I would answer.
No, how do you see in the present narrative? You already brought in that quite a few countries in Europe, right? Spain, Germany, and Sweden. They're all doubling down more on renewable. So how do you see is Europe going to be divided about nuclear and
I would say
renewables?
I would say that Europe is already divided on nuclear and renewables. So you have Germany that closed down the nuclear power plants and is betting on renewables, but that is having a cost on the industry. So Germany is by far the most expensive energy in Europe, and companies are leaving Germany at the moment. They are investing somewhere else.
They are talking about companies will leave, but do you see companies already leaving Germany?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of big ones like that are already announcing to leave Germany and going elsewhere. And at the same time, Germany is also receiving electricity from other countries around, France and Sweden, and that are producing nuclear also. They have renewables, but also nuclear. There was an important step from Sweden. Sweden said that their goal is not 100% renewables. Their goal is 100% carbon free. And if you think, this is really a nice steer on what on the goal, because the goal really is not renewables at any cost. The goal for the energy transition is to be carbon free. And Sweden is doing that with renewables, with nuclear, and with the bet on nuclear that they are already speaking about putting more nuclear. And in Europe, you have several different countries now that are going towards nuclear. You have Poland, you have a lot of Eastern countries that are speaking about having nuclear projects. You have France, that at the same time that they are developing the renewables, they are speaking about building 6 new reactors, nuclear reactors, and with the option to 8 more new reactors. And probably this will be the way to go, is this mix of both energy.
Where do you see the gap that all the environmentalists or the green focused are so against nuclear? Where do you see the gap? Where do you think that they don't see the big picture that you are referring?
Well, where they do not see the big picture. First of all, to ensure that you have firm electricity with renewables, you have to take gas along with you. So you don't have renewables without gas unless you have storage growing a lot, which probably will not happen immediately. So gas is going along with renewables. So it happened, and it was possible in Germany because they had the gas flowing from Russia. But now that we don't have the gas from Russia, of course, you have other dependencies. Gas is still flowing, but gas always goes with renewables. So the new bet now is that you are going to produce green hydrogen. And everyone speaks about green hydrogen, but Germany already said that they don't have the capacity or the space to produce all the green hydrogen that they have. So they are expecting the other countries to produce hydrogen for them. So you invest in the renewables to produce hydrogen for Germany and for the other countries. And what I find it more, where I find that it is a concern, is that you are now going to countries in Africa, for instance, saying that promoting green hydrogen projects there, like Ethiopia and Kenya and Namibia, countries where 50% of the population doesn't have access to electricity, and you are promising to go there to put solar panels to produce green hydrogen that you need because you don't have room or space in your own country. So I find that this is a kind of energy colonialism that we are trying to steer to justify our options. While having nuclear there, they would have the room and they would provide the energy, and they could even provide hydrogen. Wouldn't be green, it would be pink hydrogen, but I say pink is greener than green. This energy policy has a lot of ideology around, and people didn't accept traditionally the nuclear. But there are more and more environmentalists that are speaking about nuclear and seeing nuclear as an option, because they realize nuclear has advantages. It has advantages from the point of view of carbon emissions. It has advantage from a point of view of space you take to implement the nuclear power plant. You don't need the huge amount of space that you need, for instance, for solar PVs to take the nuclear power plant. It has advantages from the point of view of materials. If you look into the materials that are required for renewables, you see that it is a huge amount when compared to nuclear. And then there's this dimension of security of supply. At the moment, you are buying a lot of solar panels from China. More than 75% of the solar panel supply is coming from China. So you are exchanging your dependency on Russian gas from a dependency on the solar panels from China, soon probably also on the wind generators. Most of them will come from China. And of course, you are neglecting the environmental aspects. It requires rare earths for wind that are explored in China. It requires to manufacture the solar panels in China, and for that you are burning a lot of coal there also to manufacture the solar panels. And people tend to neglect those impacts because not in my backyard, the NIMBY effect. The same approach that they have towards nuclear power plant when they say, I don't want nuclear near me, they also neglect it when they speak about renewables. It's far, then not near me, not in my backyard. I pretend that they are not there. But of course, we need to take that into account. We need to take into account how mining for cobalt is done in the Republic Democratic of Congo for the electric vehicles. So all these, if you take all these considered, probably you will have a different view on the energy transition and how you can take that on board. And if you take all these considered, having a bit of nuclear makes a lot of sense.
I think one other argument has also been on the safety side of it, right? Because of even Fukuyama, right? The Japanese nuclear plant accident. Of course, Chernobyl was the first awakening of sorts from that point. So I think these things set a narrative for the common man, right? Because they become the posters for saying no to it. So how do you address that?
Yeah. So Fukushima and Chernobyl, they were tragedies. But the first thing that you need to consider is that if you take all the electricity generated by nuclear, and you take all the victims that are credited to nuclear, you will see that the nuclear is is the energy that has less victims, much less than carbon, than coal, much less than hydro, for instance. The biggest accidents on energy were hydro power plants, dams that busted, and that a lot of people died. On nuclear, you had Chernobyl, about 4,000 victims, and you had Fukushima, which has credited 575 victims, but none of these victims is from radiation. Those were from the evacuation process, and these are in the reports from the United Nations. So they were tragedies, people died, but if you take into consideration the amount of deaths by resulting from those accidents and the amount of energy produced by nuclear, you have the least damaging power source. And of course, you have other studies, for instance, for Germany. Germany, after Fukushima in 2011, they decided to start dropping nuclear power plants. There's one study that shows that the amount that they replace it mostly with lignite, coal. And the amount of additional deaths associated to this change is about 1,100 deaths per year, just from this exchange from nuclear to coal in Germany per year. And it has a social cost of about 7 to 8 thousand million euros, billions in American, billion euros per year is the social cost of abandoning nuclear in Germany.
Oh,
so
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So nuclear is not. We had these accidents. We learned from the accidents. Power plants are much safer today, and the safety is always increasing. And still, nuclear is the safest energy on Earth, even if people are afraid of the radiation.
Another argument some of these environmentalists make is the disposal of waste. You can never make them completely non-radioactive from a point of disposal. So that is another argument.
Yeah, but you know how to store them. And compared to usually what people do not realize is that nuclear is a very dense energy. So you don't need a lot of fuel to produce a lot of energy, which means that you also do not have a lot of waste produced from nuclear. Just to give an idea, if all the electricity for my life, a Portuguese, the whole electricity that I needed up to 80 years of my life was produced with nuclear, the waste would fit on 1/3 of a Coke can. 1/3. all the electricity for my whole life. And for an American, it would take the whole can, because an American uses 2.7 more energy than a Portuguese. But this is the amount of residues or the waste that you have from nuclear. So the whole waste produced from all nuclear power plants in the world until today, if you didn't have containers around, would fit on a football field with 3 meters high. So this gives you an idea that it's not that much waste. Of course, you have to treat it, and you know how to treat it. It has to be vitrified. You can store it in containers, big containers with concrete and stainless steel around, but they are safe, and you can even embrace the containers and you don't have radiation. So we know how to store the residues. You don't go there. It's not easy to... You don't go there and you steal a container, so it's not a risk from that point of view. These are 400 tons containers with the waste inside, so you can store them safely for a long time. And actually, what we call waste is only waste if we waste it, because waste has still a lot. We only use 5% of the energy of the fuel when we take it out from the nuclear power plant. So we still have a lot of energy in there. And the idea and what is growing and what is being developed is new reactors that can reuse this waste to make them harmful and at the same time to produce energy. And there are already some examples. For instance, fast neutron reactors in Russia are transforming plutonium from previous nuclear heads, and they are being transformed into energy. So there's alternatives to do that. Of course, it needs more research, but it's not waste. It's only waste if you waste it. And we know how to treat it and store it for a period, and of course to retrieve it if required to produce energy.
Well, there are also some popular stories of how these nuclear waste got dumped in developing countries, right, or underdeveloped countries. So that is another very unfortunate but real scenario as well. So
yeah, well, it happened in the past, and there's even stories here in Portugal by the sea in the 70s. But from the 70s until now, 50 years passed. So I do hope that we have grew as a civilization and that we are not storing. But actually, even consider that water is probably the best shield. It would be much worse if they were putting that somewhere else in a landfill. So
that has also happened, right? Landfill has also happened.
For these high nuclear waste, I don't think so. Probably for medical, radiological waste that has happened in the past. But we have grew as a civilization. Everything is very well regulated. So you have IAEA controlling everything and being very on top of it to control. So, for instance, even during now with the Ukrainian war, you had transfer of fuel from one power plant in Ukraine to another power plant, and IAEA was there accounting for how much was leaving the nuclear power plant and how much was entering the storage to ensure that nothing was missed. So you have much more control today over these issues. Much more, for instance, than when you are burning coal, that everything goes into the atmosphere and it crosses borders, or with chemical dumpsters. So it's a very well regulated industry. So I don't think that this is a problem today that you are going to have. We evolved as a civilization, and we evolved as consumers of nuclear and how to treat and to treat well the nuclear. So I think that the waste is not a problem. We know how to treat it and store it safely, and waste is not waste if we bring it to become fuel again.
Right. And how is the energy transition changing in Portugal as you see it?
So the Portuguese government has a goal for having renewables. The goal now, I think, is set 75% by 2030. So there's a lot of bet in renewables, and And renewables is wind. We have hydro, but it's wind and mostly solar and hydrogen now. One of the problems I see first is that we are growing a lot on solar PV and on wind without considering the security of supply, ensuring that we have electricity at all times. I did some calculations for what is forecast for 2035. Which is just around the corner. And if you expect an electrification of the country, so you expect more electric vehicles, more heat pumps, you expect more people to use stoves, electrical stoves, etc. That brings a problem because you have sun during the day, but you don't have at night. And most of these things will happen at night when people want to cook dinners, when people are cold at home, and when people want to charge their cars. And you have this phenomena that is already happening in, for instance, in California, what is called the duck curve, where during the day you are able to fit the demand with solar and renewables. But when the end of the day arrives, you have a sudden increase on the demand that is not able to supply. So I do think that there's a huge risk on just going all renewables. Of course, at the moment in Portugal, we still have our energetic border is the Iberian Peninsula. So within our energetic border, we have 7.4 gigawatts of nuclear power plants in Spain. Which are providing part of our electricity together with renewables, of course, but they are quite important to supply us electricity. The problem is that Spain is also going on this trajectory of renewables, and they are saying that they are going to close the nuclear power plants. And I'm a bit concerned that what is going to happen. We are not ensuring the security of supply. For going all renewables, you would need a lot of storage to firm your electricity production, or you go for you need to have gas power plants that are going to supply you electricity in the peak. So I think that there's another way of doing it. Of course, it's not putting everything renewables and then saying, well, there's no space for nuclear, because of course, if you put everything when nuclear comes in the end, of course, you didn't think on the best mix. So there's a better way to do that, which is considering now what is the growth for renewables that together with nuclear would fit quite well on the expected demand of electricity. And it's really now the moment to do that. That's a discussion that is going on in Portugal. It's going on the people that are concerned about nuclear and the role of nuclear. Not so much on the side of the government and the people that believe that renewables is the only way to go, but it is a discussion that I think we need to address, and we need to address soon, because personally, and doing some calculations, I do not believe that all renewables is the way. It's not the most, it's not the least expensive solution for us. It will not provide the least expensive electricity to the consumer, and it's something that we really need to address. And in Portugal, there's now also the bet on offshore wind, which is extremely expensive. We are speaking of costs that exceeds 150 euros per megawatt hour, which is expensive. And usually I say if we have money to consider offshore at these costs, certainly we need to consider nuclear, because it's not that expensive when compared with these costs that are being given for offshore wind.
And so you see that Portugal is also going in line with the majority of the European countries, aligning to...
Not the majority. I wouldn't say the majority of the European countries. Don't forget that we have now 16 European countries that have a nuclear alliance. So Portugal is going together with Germany, Austria, Luxembourg, Spain. Probably I'm forgetting some countries, but they are going together with these countries that they say they are against nuclear, and they are opposing nuclear to become part of the green taxonomy of the European Commission. But we have many other countries, and Denmark was also opposing, although Denmark is also discussing nuclear somehow. But you have a lot of other countries that are considering nuclear and are investing in nuclear, like I mentioned already, France and Poland, distant countries, Estonia, Czech Republic, Bulgaria. So all of them most of them that today rely a lot on coal, they are considering nuclear as one of the options.
But why is it that other than France, of course, most of them are very small economies? France is perhaps the biggest nuclear backing country, right? Otherwise, even US is going for renewable. So where is this renewable argument is so strong, and from your opinion, because you also do community outreach in educating people at schools and colleges and all that, but in your own government is going in this direction. So where is it? Looks like the popular narrative is coming from what? USA, that a lot of these countries are aligning to?
Yeah, well, it all roots, I think, in Europe, it's rooted to Germany and the decision of Germany that in a given moment, the government made a coalition with the Greens, the Green Party, and nuclear became a non-issue and something that they didn't want to take on board. At the same time, in the Commission, there were some people involved, and with more people related to Greenpeace being involved on the decision making on energy. And of course, this conditioned the decisions, or some of the decisions related to energy in the European Commission. I think it is very positive that the European Commission now is changing a bit the direction, saying that considering nuclear on the green taxonomy is a good change, considering that under certain conditions, pink hydrogen should be considered green hydrogen. So this is also a good steer. But of course, Germany taking these decisions, a lot of countries follow Germany and what Germany does. So Germany had this energy wind, the energetic transition. But you have to don't forget that the energy wind in Germany costed already 500,000 million euros. And still, they are far from having the energy they need from renewables. They still need to invest a lot on gas power plants that they say that by 2037 will operate with hydrogen. And they are not really solving immediately the problem, and I don't know if they are going to solve it in the future. So I think that some countries are realizing that we need to address it differently. Even France, that is now putting more renewables, still has nuclear on it, because they understand that the cheap energy and the security of supply without depending from outside really requires this approach.
Well, incidentally, I remember Greenpeace was in the forefront of opposing setting up of a nuclear power plant even in India. They did manage to hold up the project by almost 5 years, 6 years, I think. So that was significant play happened there, in fact. But of course, the project was started, but it was delayed by a very long time.
Yeah, but you have to take into account that these delays, this adds to the cost. And then people say nuclear is expensive because they are introducing artificially some delays to the project. And when you start digging into the details, you see that there's a lot of disinformation going on. A good example, and very recent example, is the tritiated water in Fukushima. There was a lot of disinformation around the tritiated water in Fukushima, while the levels that they were going to send into the ocean were far below the regulated levels that exist in other areas.
I think primary argument there was that we don't know what will be the long-term impact on the fish and the other living beings in the water, right? Because end of the day, they still carry some amount of things. So the whole argument was from there, right?
but tritium exists in the nature. So we have tritium produced by cosmic rays. We have the low doses, they are very well dissolved in water. Water is a very good shielding for radiation. In particular, tritium doesn't have a very energetic particle emitted from radiation. So the argument, if you look in detail to the science, saying that you do not know what are the impact, then it holds for almost everything. You do not know what is the impact of the windmills on the bird's life, or you do not know what is the impact of the BPA's emission from the epoxy that is used on windmills. So you can use this argument for everything. So that is what you do not know. But what you do know is that there's no evidence that it has a huge impact. So I think that you can only work with what you know, because with what you do not know, you can drive a lot of doubts, but you are not bringing a decision. So I feel that this type of approach is disinformation. You are speaking about what you do not know just to steer the doubt on the people's mind. And this is happening with nuclear for a long time. That is, this is disinformation speaking. We do not know. It may have an impact, etc. So it's just driving radiophobia, and this radiophobia really is much worse than what we are trying to solve by providing cheap energy to people. And if you don't, and I imagine in India, if you didn't have this project during these 5 years, you were burning coal. And these were having an impact on population. So you really need to think well on all what is involved.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, coal is the biggest source of energy for us, nearly 50%. It's come down to 47% or 45 or so, but coal is still a number one energy source for India. And I think it's likely to reduce over next 20, 25 years, because I think we have about 31 nuclear power plants coming up. So it's huge.
Yeah.
India has gone very big on nuclear. But at the same time, India has gone very big on renewables also. India is the largest renewable energy generator, if you will, with largest solar power plants spread across. So
yeah, well, there's an adequate mix. Most of the people that are pro-nuclear are not against renewables. What we most of the times we try to discuss is the proper mix, is the greenwashing that there's around energy and
it's not the same argument when people who are talking for climate change, right? You'd never hear climate change people talking about nuclear, right? They only talk about renewables. So why is that?
Well, I don't know. Lack of knowledge, or probably they believe on most of the myths that are around nuclear energy. Fighting the myths around nuclear energy is quite hard, because it is intrinsic. It's something that comes for more than 50 years. People saying nuclear, no thank you. And these roots to the 70s in the United States and all these, and after 3 Mile Island. And but what you saw is that the alternative was gas, and the alternative was coal. So a lot of people say that it was driven, this anti-nuclear sentiment was driven by the oil and gas industry. And now renewables are seen as a way for gas industry in particular to remain operating. Hydrogen is a way for gas industry to remain operating, because they are saying that they are going to burn hydrogen instead of gas.
But there are a lot of people who actually say that hydrogen is not reliable and logical as well, right? Almost 30-35% get lost in transition. So it's not practical to pipe hydrogen as a gas. And if you have to transport it, you have to freeze it to such a low temperature that you actually end up using significant amount of energy to cool it. So how is hydrogen as reliable a source? So that is another.
Well, but you come to the point. Why is this narrative having this much attention? Because actually hydrogen makes sense in some applications where you produce near the big, for instance, for cement, for green steel, for producing.
Well, actually, cement should find an alternate, right? It's one of the most polluting thing, but we keep the whole infrastructure is around cement again.
But these applications probably make sense to produce for farming, to produce. Sorry, I'm missing the word ammonia for farming. But you need to produce and you need to use it to transform it locally. Doesn't make sense. Like for instance, Japan, they approach it starting with heating. Doesn't make sense probably for heating. Doesn't make sense probably for cars, because the only advantage I see for cars is that you defer the use. Like it's like going to the pump today. And of course, this is an advantage. You don't have to charge. You go there and you pump the fuel into your car. But it's the only advantage, because from the point of view of energy, you spend much more energy to produce this hydrogen. So I see a lot of disadvantages on the hydrogen, and I don't see that it is viable to produce hydrogen with green energy. I did the accounts for Portugal for some projects, and my calculations in Portugal say that most of 50% of the time, the electrolyzers will not be working. So is this viable from the point of view of economic investment? So, but still, you see a lot of narrative around hydrogen. So who is driving this narrative? Who is trying to justify the use of hydrogen, promising to burn hydrogen to replace gas? Who benefits from it? So it's something that we really need to start considering. I have some ideas that this is a way for renting, for making to make profit out of the pipes that already exist for gas, although probably they are not suitable. This is a way to keep burning gas, promising that you put a bit of hydrogen in it, but you are losing even heating power. So, but hydrogen and renewables go together. Is hydrogen, renewables, and the electric vehicles. So you have this holy trinity of the renewables all together that I do think people are embracing, but they are not really considering what are the implications.
Well, incidentally, we had Adrian Blanc, who's a senior executive with Saudi Aramco. He was a guest in Future Fast. So, in fact, I urge the audience and listeners who have missed that conversation, do look up. It is very interesting. In fact, he was telling me that Aramco is the largest producer of hydrogen gas. And he made a very strong case for nuclear energy, and he said hydrogen is not dependable because obviously hydrogen gas is produced in their part of their process of treating fuel. So he says we manufacture a lot of hydrogen, but it is not practical to pipe the hydrogen gas. So even somebody who is identified with oil and gas is talking about nuclear as the future of energy transition. One more thing I just wanted to ask. You also studied and worked in UK. I recently came across a project where a startup is supposed to pipe ammonia and generate hydrogen at the plant and make it a plant station, as in, like a fuel station. You drive down to the station and you fill hydrogen gas. And hydrogen is not piped. Ammonia is piped and they'll generate it. So so I'm just trying to reach those guys. But have you come across that, and how feasible is that? That was
I haven't come across that, but I imagine if you have a micro nuclear reactor locally in a power station, you can produce the hydrogen locally enough to supply the vehicles that pass there. So I didn't come across that, but you still have to you have a lot of problems still with hydrogen that need to be addressed. And storage is one of them. Even if you produce locally, you still have to storage, you have to cool them down, you have to put at the pressure. So there are a lot of developments still to be done for us to use hydrogen.
And also, what is the cost of this micro nuclear plant to produce?
Yeah, the aim is for the nuclear or the SMRs, the small modular reactors, or the micro modular reactors, to be lower or comparable to a nuclear power plant, with the difference that you build them fast, you build them modular, and by doing that you have a lower capital cost because it's much faster, everything. And so you can produce, the aim is to produce cheap electricity and faster because you have this modular, and then you put the reactors closer to where you are going to use. Of course, I can imagine that this may become a problem from the point of view of regulation. And I wonder how this is going to be used. But there's a market for these small modular reactors and for micro reactors that are being discussed now.
Do you think large industries will have their own micro nuclear power plants to power their requirement? Do you think are we going towards that?
I think is one of the ways to go. These reactors are it is a challenging from the point of view of regulation that countries will have to address. But those reactors are safer from the point of view of not becoming, not having accidents, not requiring a huge amount of cooling, and of being safe from the point of view of use. Some of them can even be almost a closed cement box in there. So there are alternatives. There are alternatives that can make it very useful to be closer to industries. I think there's a long way to go. Personally, I think the first ones we are going to see is in the big farms, not big farms, but all together. Rather than having a big power plant, you have several similar small ones, all in the same area, because from the regulation point of view, I see it's much easier. But if they prove to work, I think that there's options to put it closer to industries that are going to use, and it makes sense.
So what you're saying, if I can rephrase it, instead of one industry having it, have it in an industrial estate, catering to a bunch of industries around that.
Yeah, because because we are not only speaking about electricity, we may be speaking about heat for chemical processes, for different applications. We may speaking about different ways of producing hydrogen. So you may have big industrial areas supplied by this type of power plants, and it will make.
Do you think of anybody who's doing it now? Or any names that you can recall?
Directly thinking about it, I'm not coming to mind of any, but you can see, but with a similar approach, but not exactly the same. Olkiluoto 3, that was built in Finland, it was paid by an association of industries.
Okay.
And so it was, what they ensure was electricity at a given price. That's what they get from Olkiluoto 3. And so this association was they called in Finland mankalas. So this mankala was ensuring security of supply of electricity at a given cost for their activities. So it's not similar in the sense that it is for a given industry and locally, but they are having this approach. So you can think of this being translated into local reactors for a given set of industries that pay for that electricity and heat for their own production. So it makes sense, and some places in the world already are doing that. So, or something compared. So this is important. I would like to mention just one thing that I mentioned a lot: oil and gas. There's one thing today when people are speaking about energy, we speak about fossil fuels. We cannot drive away from fossil. Not from the point of view of energy, but we need that as raw material. So people that are speaking against fossil fuels cannot forget that we need the raw material for a lot of issues in our life. So
You're referring to plastic?
Yeah, plastic and many other applications. We do not need to burn them, and that is the difference. So we still need these as raw materials until we have alternatives. So oil and gas is not at risk from that point of view. There's better uses for these materials. When you see, and this is important also because we are seeing a lot of youngs rebelling against oil and gas and painting monuments, etc., and saying we want, well, first they have unreal targets, which is 100% renewables by 2025, and then they are against fossil fuels. But it's not against fossil fuels that we are. We are against fossil fuels, but it's difficult to be against fossil raw materials. And I think that there's a lot of education to be done there. Also, and the outreach that needs to be for people to understand what is at issue. And again, we have this anxiety on the young generations that comes from all this narrative that we are building. The world is being destroyed. There are these nasty guys, the nuclear and the oil and gas, that want to destroy our world. And we only have this tool, one solution, which is renewables. And we are driving these youngsters into not thinking exactly what everything that is involved. And I think there's a lot of education to be done there.
Well, in fact, I think we can go on and on, but I just want to get you, pull you back into one particular question in terms of how, you also do go to schools, colleges, and talk to them in the process of outreach, and also about educating them about nuclear as a technology and as a energy reliable reliable energy source for transition and all that. If you have to give a shout out to one, our environmentalists, to all these youngsters who are already driven by the present climate change narrative that says only and exclusively renewable energy, and three, to the policymakers who actually in your own government as well, right, in your own country, where they and the neighboring countries, or in Germany and many other European countries, where they are saying absolute no to nuclear energy. What kind of a shout out would you want to give? I mean, if you want to use this and give a shout out to all of them, what would you want to say?
Root your decisions into knowledge and into a rational approach with proper calculations, and take into consideration all the impacts that it has on people, on industry, on employment, and all the energy required, and how you ensure that people have the lowest costs, the best living, with what is the best option for them to take on board. And if you take this rational approach and you do the proper calculations, most of the time, or most probably, you arrive to the conclusion that you need nuclear in the mix. But you need to approach it from a knowledgeable, non-passionate point of view. You really have to get rid of your preconceptions to embrace nuclear as one option. We are not saying that just because we love nuclear. It's really because when we are trying to educate people, usually I say to the students, I'm not selling you this idea. I'm not trying to, this is not a religion. What I would like you to see is that there's different views of a problem. And if you narrow your solution into one single view, you are missing all that is in the landscape. So nuclear is part of the landscape of solutions that we have for the energy transition. It has to be considered properly, and just do the math. And that's what I'm telling. I just wrote recently an article on a Portuguese newspaper. In Portuguese, it sounds better, but it is do the math instead of pretending that you know the result. because it sounds better in Portuguese, but basically, you don't take decisions without doing the math. Otherwise, you may be taking wrong decisions. It's just based on your beliefs. So it needs to be rational, not a belief. And basically, that's it. Most of the things I say is because I did some math, some calculations. They may be wrong, but at least I did the calculations.
Right. In fact, I had one guest called Andre Wakker. I think he was from Netherlands.
Yeah, I know Andre from the post in LinkedIn.
Right. So, in fact, he made this line where he said that clean energy is more important than green energy. So,
oh yeah, that's the same as Sweden. 100% carbon free, not 100% renewables.
Right. And ironically, we have a lot of people from Sweden who also talk only renewable, right? And they actually spread word across the globe that only renewable is what the world needs.
Yeah.
And I think we'll always have that mix.
Well, I would say they are wrong, or they need to look at least why the other side is saying differently. We are not against renewables, but we need to consider the proper mix to have a rational approach.
Well, thank you so much, Bruno. And I think, in fact, some of my past guests have been very strongly vocal about their arguments, particularly for nuclear, while you have also been very strongly vocal, but you've also been extremely moderate in your approach, and you're even proposing a mix, and not even calling out that some of the it's only the activists who want renewables and not the scientists. That was one of the statements from somebody. Which is quite strong. But that's the whole idea of bringing this kind of conversation to our audience and listeners, that make your own opinion, but be informed before you make your opinion. And don't be close towards anything. Yeah. So, Bruno, thank you so much for spending this time and sharing all these things with us. And please do look up. You can find Bruno's link right below this podcast. You can follow him, and also look up. He gave out so much of data, and I was extremely intrigued by that. I like to see if there is a published data about the number of casualties because of other energy sources versus nuclear. So that's very interesting. So thank you once again, Bruno, and the audience and listeners. I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please feel free to go ahead and share this across. And if you've not yet followed Future Fast podcast, please do it now. And come back soon, because we're going to have one more conversation with Bruno, trying to get his perspective on the future, what he thinks will happen and what perhaps will not change in future as well. That till we meet again, enjoy the ride. Bruno, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.